My name is Margaret, and I'm 66 years old. I've spent most of my life working, giving everything I had for my family, especially my daughter, Grace. She was my world, and I never thought she could hurt me. I'd given up everything for her. My health, my time, my dreams. And all I ever wanted was to see her happy, living a life better than mine. But everything changed one morning, and it was all because of a voice message. It was an ordinary Tuesday when I first heard it. I had been sitting at the kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, when my phone buzzed. I didn't recognize the number, so I almost didn't answer. But something told me to check it. I pressed play, and there it was. My daughter's voice, clear as day, but the words that followed made my heart stop. The message was meant for her husband, Richard. I realized this the moment I heard her voice, the tone colder than I had ever heard before. "Ricardo," she started, "I can't take having my mother in this house anymore. She's a nuisance. She gets into everything we do. And we're already spending so much money on her. I've been looking into some cheap places. I found one that only costs $800 a month." My hands trembled, and the phone almost slipped from my grasp. At that moment, the world seemed to collapse around me. This was the daughter I raised. The same one I had worked tirelessly for, cleaning other people's houses just to put food on the table. The same one for whom I had sold my jewelry to pay for college. The same one who cried in my arms when Richard left her at the altar the first time. I had sacrificed everything to see her succeed. And now she was calling me a nuisance. But it didn't end there. The message continued, and what came next sent a wave of shock so deep, I could barely breathe. "I've already checked the house papers," she said, her voice now cold, calculating. "It's in her name, but I found a way to transfer it to our name without her realizing. Carol, my cousin, who works at the county clerk's office, is going to help me. It'll only cost us $500 in bribes and fees, but it's worth it." I felt as if the floor beneath me had suddenly disappeared. My daughter, Grace, the one I had loved with every fiber of my being, was planning to steal my house. The house I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, over the years. The house where I had raised her, where we had celebrated her birthdays, where we had shared so many memories. And now, she was plotting to take it away from me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to confront her right there and then. But instead I sat in silence, my world spinning. My hands were shaking so much, I almost dropped the phone. I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could she do this? How could she betray me like this? I had worked my entire life for that house. I had spent 30 years of my life working 12-hour days to make sure Grace had everything she needed. And now, my own daughter was going to steal it all away. And then I heard it. The laughter. Her laughter. "In a month, Mom will be in the home and we'll own everything," she said, her voice dripping with cruelty. "We can finally live in peace, without that bitter old woman controlling us." I felt as if my heart had shattered into a million pieces. I had never heard my daughter speak like this before. The woman I had loved so much, the one I thought I knew, was planning my downfall. I thought about all the sleepless nights I spent, all the sacrifices I made, all the years I had worked, and this was how she repaid me. But the pain didn't stop there. What hurt the most was the complete disregard for everything I had done for her. My entire life had been about Grace. I'd given her everything. And now she was talking about me like I was a burden. Nuisance. As I sat there, my hands still trembling, I realized something. I had been so blinded by love that I had never seen the truth. I had been so focused on making sure Grace had a better life than I had that I failed to see that she had become someone I didn't even recognize. This wasn't the sweet, loving daughter I had raised. This was a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who was plotting to take everything from me. I stayed up that night, unable to sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of what I had just heard. But one thing was clear. Grace had completely underestimated me. She thought I was just a helpless, naive old woman, but she was wrong. I had lived through too much, sacrificed too much, to let her destroy me. She might have thought she had everything figured out, but she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The next morning, I woke up with a determination I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't going to let my daughter get away with this. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I had given everything for her, and now I was going to take back what was rightfully mine. I was going to fight back, and Grace would have no idea what was coming. As I sat there, my heart heavy with the weight of what I had just heard, I thought about everything I had done for Grace, everything I had sacrificed to give her the life she deserved. It was hard not to feel like all of it had been in vain, like the years of hard work, the sleepless nights, and the selflessness had been wasted. I thought about how I raised Grace, how I had poured every ounce of my love into her, believing with every fiber of my being that one day she would be grateful for the life I had fought so hard to give her. But now I wasn't so sure. Growing up, I was taught that family came first, that love was shown through sacrifice. My mother, may she rest in peace, was the embodiment of that. She worked long hours as a seamstress, from the crack of dawn until late at night, just to make sure we had food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. I watched her, day in and day out, working tirelessly, never complaining, always putting the needs of her children before her own. She was my role model, the woman who taught me that love meant giving everything you had, even when there was nothing left to give. I remember how she used to say to me, as I sat beside her watching her sew, "Margaret, in this life, the only thing that matters is family. For family, you give everything to the last drop of blood." Those words stayed with me, guiding me through the difficult years of my own life. I knew that when I had children, I would be just like my mother. I would give everything I had, not just for their well-being but for their future. I would work hard to make sure they never went without, that they never had to struggle the way I had. When I got pregnant with Grace at 18, I was terrified. I was young, alone, and had no idea how I would raise a child on my own. Her father disappeared the night after he promised me we would get married, leaving me to face the world on my own. I went to his family for help, but they slammed the door in my face, telling me that their son wasn't going to ruin his future for some random girl. But my mother, despite her own struggles, stepped in and took care of me. "This child is going to have everything we couldn't," she told me, holding me in her arms as I cried. "We'll raise her together so she can be a good woman." With my mother's support, I got through those tough early years, and I promised myself I would do everything for Grace, no matter the cost. I started cleaning houses at 19, earning barely $20 a day, but every cent I earned went toward her future. Every time I scrimped and saved, I thought of Grace and how one day she would look back and see everything I had done for her, just like I had looked back on my mother's sacrifices. The first time I took Grace to kindergarten, I remember walking her there because we didn't have money for the bus. She wore her uniform perfectly ironed, and her shoes were shiny, even though I could barely afford to buy her new ones. I walked past the other mothers who arrived in fancy cars and expensive clothes, feeling out of place in my patched-up dress and with my calloused hands. But when Grace kissed me on the cheek and said, "Thank you, Mom. You're the best in the world," I knew it was all worth it. In that moment, I felt a surge of love so deep it almost overwhelmed me. I knew I was giving her the best I could, and I was proud of that. Years went by, and I kept up my routine, working from dawn to dusk, cleaning other people's houses just to make sure Grace had everything she needed. I worked weekends, doing laundry for extra money, all so she could have a better life than mine. My mother passed away when Grace was 8, but before she left, she made me a promise I will never forget. "Margaret, that child is your greatest treasure. Give her an education. Give her love, and she will take care of you when you're old," she said. Those words stayed with me, driving me forward when times were tough. Even when I wanted to give up, I thought of Grace and my mother's promise, and I pushed through the exhaustion. When Grace turned 15, I worked extra days for 6 months to give her the party she deserved. It cost me $3,500. Money I had been saving to fix our leaky roof. But seeing her smile that night, watching her dance in her golden dress, was priceless. "Mom, I don't know how you give me so much when you have almost nothing," she told me that night. "When I grow up, I'm going to give all this back to you, multiplied by 1,000. I believed her. I thought that, one day, Grace would appreciate all I had done for her and that she would love me the way I had loved her. I didn't expect anything in return, except the knowledge that I had given her the best possible life. As Grace grew older, she became an exemplary student. She had the best grades in her class, participated in school plays, and everyone told me she had a bright future ahead of her. But keeping up with those studies wasn't cheap. Books, uniforms, field trips. It all cost money I didn't have. So, I started cleaning a fourth house on Sundays, my only day off, just to make sure she had everything she needed. When it was time for Grace to enroll in college, I knew it would be a huge financial burden. The cost was $15,000 a year, and I was only earning $400 a month. I didn't know how I was going to manage, but I knew I had to find a way. So, I took out a loan using the house as collateral. I sold the last piece of jewelry my mother had given me, and I even sold my mother's sewing machine. I told Grace, "I couldn't go to college, but you are going to be a professional. You'll have a degree. You'll work in an office with air conditioning, and you'll never have to clean other people's houses like your mother." That day, I watched Grace sign the enrollment papers with tears in my eyes. I couldn't have been prouder. I knew that all the sacrifices had been worth it. For the next 4 years, I continued to work relentlessly, doing whatever it took to support her education. I spent every last penny to make sure she had everything she needed. When Grace graduated, it was the proudest day of my life. Watching her walk across that stage in her cap and gown, hearing her name called, and feeling the crowd's applause. It was a moment I'll never forget. But after the ceremony, as Grace hugged me and said, "Mom, this is as much yours as it is mine. I would never have made it here without you," something changed. I began to feel that maybe, just maybe, the sacrifices I had made weren't enough. Over the next few years, I started to notice small changes in Grace. The way she began to look at me, the way she started treating me differently. It was subtle at first, just little things that I brushed off, thinking it was just a result of her growing independence. But deep down I knew something was off. I had done everything for her, and now I was beginning to feel like maybe she didn't need me the way she once had. After Grace graduated, I thought things would finally settle down. I thought that maybe after everything I'd done for her, she would see the truth, that everything I did, every sacrifice I made, was for her. But instead of the closeness we had once shared, something began to shift between us. It was subtle at first. Little things I couldn't put my finger on, moments where she seemed distant, as if I no longer fit into her carefully crafted life. She had everything she had ever wanted. She had the education, the job, the man she loved. Why, then, did it feel like I was no longer important to her? The first change came when Grace and Richard married. At first, I was thrilled for her. Seeing her finally settle down after all the heartache she had been through made me feel like my hard work had paid off. But as the years went by, I began to notice a shift in their relationship with me. It wasn't obvious at first. They still visited on Sundays, but the visits became shorter, and the conversations, once warm and easy, became strained. Grace, who once shared everything with me, began to confide more and more in Richard. Slowly, I found myself becoming a bystander in my own daughter's life. I remember the first time they stopped coming to visit. I had been preparing one of my famous Sunday dinners, the kind Grace used to love, but when I called her, she told me that they had other plans that day. I thought nothing of it at first. Maybe they were busy. But then, the next week it happened again. And the next week after that. They stopped coming to Sunday dinners altogether. And when I called to check on them, Grace's voice was always rushed, always distant. "Sorry, Mom, we're just so busy with work." "You know how it is," she'd say, her tone more dismissive than it had ever been before. First, I understood. They were a young couple building their life together. But as the months passed, I started to feel a nagging sense of unease. The excuses kept piling up, but something in me told me that it was more than just work keeping them away. They began to call less, and when I did reach Grace, the conversations felt cold. "How's everything, Mom?" she'd ask, but it was always in a way that felt rehearsed. There was no warmth behind the words anymore. I knew something was off, but I couldn't figure out exactly what. Then came the subtle comments, the ones that I tried to brush off at first. But deep down I knew they were more than just innocent remarks. "Mom," Grace said one day, "Richard says he's noticed you've been a little forgetful lately. Are you sure you're okay living alone in that big house?" The words stung, though she said them so casually, as if it were just a passing thought. "At your age, anything could happen," she added, her voice laced with a concern that felt more like a judgment. The seed of doubt had been planted, and from that moment on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A few weeks later, I called Grace to tell her I had made some homemade pies to send over to their house. I was so excited to share them with her. When I arrived at their home unannounced, I heard voices and laughter coming from inside, but no one answered the door right away. When Grace finally opened the door, her face was plastered with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Mom, what a surprise," she said, clearly caught off guard. "We were just organizing some paperwork," she added, stepping back as if to invite me in. But before I could fully enter, I noticed something strange. On the kitchen table, there were papers scattered everywhere, some of them with my name on them. But they quickly shuffled them into a folder, trying to hide them. I didn't know what to make of it at the time, but my gut told me something wasn't right. "Why do you need papers with my name on them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual, though my heart was racing. Grace and Richard exchanged a quick, nervous glance. "Oh, it's nothing, Mom," she said, trying to laugh it off. "Just some paperwork for insurance. You know, in case something happens to you. We're your only family after all." But as she said it, I felt a chill run down my spine. Why did she need my name on insurance papers? Why was she so nervous? Later I learned that Carol, Grace's cousin, worked at the county clerk's office. One day, I casually asked Grace about the paperwork I had seen. "Oh, don't worry, Mom," she said with a nervous smile. "Carol's just helping us update some things. You know, just the usual stuff." But the more I thought about it, the more suspicious it became. Didn't add up. And the more I called Grace, the more distant she became. It was as if she was hiding something from me, and I was beginning to feel it. But what really shook me was when Grace and Richard moved in with me temporarily. They told me that their apartment needed some repairs and that they just needed a place to stay for a month or so. At first, I was happy to have them close again. I missed our old Sundays together, and I thought maybe this would be a good chance to rekindle the bond we once had. But from the moment they moved in, things felt different. Richard started complaining about everything. "This TV is too old, Mom," he said one day. "And the internet is too slow." He even mentioned that the water pressure in the shower wasn't good enough for his liking. "At your age, maintaining this big house must be a lot of work," he said, his tone condescending. Grace, too, started rearranging my things without asking. "These plates are so outdated, Mom. I'm going to replace them," she said, tossing some of my old dishes aside. "And these clothes in your closet, they're so out of style. We should donate them." Each comment, each little change, chipped away at the comfort I once felt in my own home. I began to feel like a guest in my own house. They slowly took over, dictating how things should be done, and I started to notice that my voice, once the one that commanded respect, was now being ignored. My house, once a place of warmth and memories, no longer felt like mine. It was as if they were slowly trying to erase my presence, like I was no longer welcome in the life I had built. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, it felt like I was being shut down. One day, I overheard Richard talking on the phone outside. His voice hushed but still audible. "Yeah, we're already living here," he said. "No, she doesn't suspect a thing. Carol says we'll have everything set up in 2 weeks." My heart stopped. I didn't know what they were planning, but I knew it wasn't good. When I asked Richard who he was talking to, he quickly replied, "Just my boss about work stuff." But I knew better. It wasn't just work. It was something else, something I wasn't meant to know. The next day, I started to feel the walls closing in. Grace and Richard weren't just staying with me. They were slowly taking control of my life. They started to go through my bank statements, questioning every little withdrawal. "Mom, why do you need so much cash?" Grace asked one day when she saw I had taken out $200. At first, I brushed it off as concern, but deep down, I felt like they were slowly invading my privacy. They were starting to dictate every part of my life, from what I could do with my money to how I should live my day-to-day life. But nothing hit harder than the comments they made when they thought I wasn't listening. One afternoon, I overheard Richard talking to Grace in the kitchen. "Your mom's getting harder to handle," he said. "She's becoming stubborn with age." Grace laughed. "It's true," she said. "She forgets things, gets all difficult when we try to help her." The word stung, but it was what Grace said next that really shook me. "But what really gets to me," she said, her voice filled with disgust, "is having to listen to her stories. She talks about the past all the time like anyone cares. I can't stand it anymore." I wanted to confront them then and there, but I stayed silent. The weight of what they were doing, the manipulation, the subtle cruelty was starting to break me. This wasn't the daughter I raised. This wasn't the person I had sacrificed my entire life for. I had been so blinded by my love for her that I hadn't seen the truth. I hadn't seen how far she was willing to go to take everything I had. It wasn't until I overheard another conversation between them that I realized just how far this was going. Richard and Grace were planning to have me declared mentally incompetent. They were talking about how they could get me out of my house, how they could have me committed to a nursing home without me ever suspecting a thing. They spoke of it like it was some kind of business deal, a transaction, something that didn't involve the woman who had given everything to raise them. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that the daughter I had loved so fiercely, the one I had worked my entire life to provide for, was now planning to steal everything from me. They thought they had me cornered, that I wouldn't be able to fight back. But they were wrong. I wasn't going to be their victim anymore. I had been naive once, but that was over now. After the conversations I overheard, after the slow realization of the betrayal, I knew I couldn't just sit idly by and let Grace and Richard carry on with their plans. My entire life had been dedicated to giving her the best future I could afford, sacrificing my happiness and well-being for her. I had worked tirelessly day after day to ensure that Grace would never have to face the hardships I did as a child. And yet here I was, betrayed by the very person I had loved and raised. The sting of their cruelty was unbearable, but I refused to let it break me. That night, after hearing their conversation about having me institutionalized, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing with the thought of what I could do. I had never considered myself a particularly clever person when it came to matters of strategy or manipulation. I was just a woman who worked hard and loved fiercely. But now I had no choice but to think differently. I realized that if I didn't take matters into my own hands, I would lose everything. My house, my dignity, my life as I knew it, all at the hands of my own daughter and her husband. At dawn, I rose from bed, determined and clear-headed for the first time in a long while. The sun hadn't even fully risen, and already, I felt an unfamiliar strength course through me. The woman I had once been, kind, loving, and trusting, was gone. In her place was a woman who had been pushed to the edge, who had been used and discarded like an old pair of shoes. And that woman would no longer let herself be trampled on. I went to my closet and put on the most elegant crimson suit I had, a suit I had only worn to Grace's college graduation. I wanted to look like the woman I once was, the one who had worked hard for everything she had, the one who wasn't afraid to take on the world. I gathered all my important documents, my bank statements, my house deeds, my life insurance papers, everything I might need to secure my future. As I gathered them, I realized that my life, my future, had been in my hands all along. I had let my love for Grace blind me, but now I was going to open my eyes. I left the house with a quiet determination, the cool morning air hitting my face like a slap, reminding me that I was alive, that I still had the power to change my fate. I didn't look back, not even once. I knew I had to act quickly. Grace and Richard would be waking up soon, but by the time they realized what I was doing, it would be too late. My first stop was the bank. I walked in as soon as the doors opened. Nora, the manager who had known me for years, greeted me with a smile, but when she saw the seriousness in my eyes, it faltered. "Good morning, Ms. Baker," she said, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "How can we help you today?" "Nora, I need to review all the transactions in my account for the last 6 months," I said firmly. I had no time for small talk or pleasantries. I needed to make sure that Grace had not already accessed my funds, and if she had, I needed to stop it. Nora led me to the back office where we sat down, and I watched as she pulled up my account information on the screen. "Ms. Baker, I see that there have been several inquiries about your account," Nora said, her voice tinged with concern. "It seems your daughter, Grace, has been checking your statements with a letter of authorization signed by you." My blood ran cold. I had never signed any such letter. I felt a surge of anger rush through me, but I kept my composure. "Show me that document," I said, my voice steady but icy. Nora turned her monitor toward me and pulled up a document with my supposed signature. But it wasn't my signature. I could tell immediately that it had been forged. My signature had always been neat and precise, but this one was sloppy, the strokes too rushed, the angles wrong. It was a poor imitation and it made my stomach turn. "That's not my signature, Nora," I said quietly, though inside my anger was boiling. "Grace forged that. She's been accessing my account without my permission." Nora's eyes widened in shock. "Ms. Baker, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." She quickly started typing into her computer. "I'm going to cancel any authorization Grace had immediately. We'll also put a security alert on your account to prevent any further unauthorized access." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. The first step in taking back control of my life had been completed. But I wasn't done yet. There was still more to do. Next, I headed to the county clerk's office. I knew that Carol, Grace's cousin, worked there, and I had a feeling she had been involved in the fraudulent paperwork. I walked in without warning, a small recorder hidden in my purse, just in case I needed evidence. Carol was at her desk, flipping through some papers when she looked up and saw me. Her face paled. "Aunt Margaret," she said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" She quickly started shuffling papers, trying to hide them, but I could already see my name on one of them. "Carol, don't try to hide it," I said firmly. "I know exactly what's been going on. I know about the forged documents, about how you and Grace were planning to steal my house." Her hands shook as she tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. "Aunt Margaret, I didn't mean to," she started, but I cut her off. "I'm not here to listen to excuses, Carol," I said, my voice cold and unwavering. "I have evidence of everything. And if you don't help me fix it, I'll go straight to your boss and expose you for what you've done." Carol's face crumpled, and she broke down in tears. "Please, Aunt Margaret. I didn't want to do it. Grace said it was for your own good, that you wouldn't be able to take care of yourself. She promised me money once everything was done. I never thought it would go this far." I felt a pang of sorrow for her, but I didn't let it show. "You're going to help me reverse everything you've done, Carol," I said. "Or I will make sure you lose your job, and worse." Over the next 2 hours, Carol helped me invalidate all the fraudulent documents she had been involved in, giving me copies of everything as evidence. With her confession, I had the leverage I needed to take the next step in protecting myself. My final stop was to see Attorney Harrison Ford, a respected lawyer in the city. I presented him with all the evidence I had gathered, from the forged documents to Carol's confession. After reviewing everything, he looked up at me with admiration. "Ms. Baker, this is a serious case. We can take legal action for fraud, falsification of documents, and attempted illegal appropriation." I nodded, feeling a sense of empowerment that I hadn't felt in years. "I want justice, Attorney Ford. But more than that, I want Grace to understand that actions have consequences." For the next few hours, we prepared a strategy. Attorney Ford helped me file a civil lawsuit against Grace, Richard, and Carol, accusing them of fraud and conspiracy. We also filed a criminal complaint, knowing full well that this wouldn't just be a simple legal battle. It would be a battle to reclaim everything I had lost. When I returned home that afternoon, I felt like a different person. I wasn't the naive, trusting woman I had been before. I was stronger now, more determined than ever to fight for my rights, my house, and my dignity. The journey I had started that morning was far from over, but I had taken the first steps toward reclaiming my life. Grace and Richard had no idea what was coming, but they would soon find out. And when they did, they would understand that I had never been the helpless old woman they thought I was. When I arrived home that evening, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. The rush of adrenaline, the tension of plotting and planning, was finally behind me. I knew what I had to do, and I had done it. My next steps were clear, but what I had already accomplished gave me a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. It was no longer about revenge. It was about regaining my dignity, my strength, and my life. What was most important now was what came next, the life I would build from the ruins of the betrayal and the lessons I had learned. The next day, the atmosphere in the house felt different. Grace and Richard hadn't returned from their busy day, as they always called it, but I knew they wouldn't. They wouldn't suspect anything, not yet. I was prepared for whatever came next. As I sat in the living room, staring at the walls that once felt like home, I knew this was the last time I would sit here as their victim. This house, my house, had been filled with memories, but now those memories had become tainted with deceit and manipulation. I was done. I called Attorney Ford first thing in the morning. He had been a pillar of support throughout this entire process, guiding me through the legal labyrinth with a steady hand. I told him everything was set, and that I was ready to move forward. It wasn't just about the lawsuit anymore. This was about me taking control of my future. It was about ensuring that I would never again fall into the trap of false promises and manipulation, especially from the one person I had trusted the most. When Grace and Richard arrived that afternoon, their faces were the same, blank, unassuming, as if they were about to walk into any normal day. But this wasn't a normal day. This was the day they would face the consequences of their actions. As they entered the living room, I could see the unease in their eyes, the nervous energy that had started to build. It was in their stiff movements, in their forced smiles, in the way they kept glancing at each other. They knew something was coming, but they didn't know what. "Mom," Grace said, her voice tinged with an artificial sweetness that made my stomach churn. "How are you? Everything going well with the house?" She glanced around the room, almost as if she were trying to avoid meeting my gaze. Richard, standing beside her, was stiff, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a flicker of something I couldn't place. They were both pretending like everything was fine. But I knew better. "Everything's fine, Grace," I replied, my voice calm and steady. I smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "I actually need to talk to you both about something very important. I hope you're ready for it." Grace's smile faltered, and Richard shifted uncomfortably. They could sense the shift in the air, the tension that had suddenly filled the room. The roles had reversed. I had been the one to shrink, to cower in fear and confusion. But now, it was their turn to face the consequences. And I wasn't afraid anymore. "I've been speaking with my lawyer," I continued, my voice unwavering. "And I've taken the necessary steps to secure my future and protect myself. You've both crossed a line, and there will be consequences for what you've done." I watched as their faces drained of color. Grace's eyes widened in panic, and Richard looked as though he was about to speak, but he couldn't find the words. For a moment it felt like time had stopped. The woman who had once been so afraid, so willing to forgive, was now standing tall, confronting the people who had hurt her. I could feel the power surge through me, not from anger or vengeance, but from something far more important, the knowledge that I had taken control of my life. "I have all the evidence," I said, my voice firm. "I know about the forged documents, the fake medical reports, and the plan to have me declared incompetent. I also know about the attempts to steal my house, and how you two thought you could get away with it. Well, I've been to the bank, and I've been to the county clerk's office. Everything is in order, and I'm prepared to move forward with legal action." Grace's face contorted with fear, but she tried to hide it behind a mask of defiance. "You don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, her voice trembling. "We were just trying to help you. You're old. You can't live on your own anymore. We were trying to make sure you had the care you needed." "That's a lie," I replied coldly, cutting her off. "You weren't trying to help me. You were trying to take everything I've worked for. You were going to send me away and steal my house. I heard everything in your message. Don't try to deny it." Richard stepped forward, his voice low and angry. "This isn't over, Margaret," he growled. "You think you've won. You think you're going to get away with this." I stood up, my posture tall and proud, and looked directly into his eyes. "No, Richard. You're the one who's not going to get away with this. You thought I was weak, but I'm not. And I will make sure that everyone knows what you've done." Before they could respond, the doorbell rang. I knew exactly who it was. Attorney Ford had arrived, along with 2 police officers and a public notary. I turned to Grace and Richard, who were now both visibly panicking. They knew what was about to happen. The moment of truth had arrived. "Sit down," I said, my voice commanding. "It's time you learned the truth." The officers entered, followed by the attorney. They introduced themselves, but Grace and Richard were too stunned to react. "Good afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Williams," Attorney Ford said, his tone professional but firm. "We are here to execute the legal orders we discussed with Ms. Baker." He pulled out a folder, and as he did, I could feel a wave of relief wash over me. I had done everything right, and now it was time for them to face the music. "Grace, Richard," I said, my voice calm. "You've been caught. There's no running from the truth anymore. We have irrefutable evidence of your actions: fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." The attorney began to lay out the documents one by one. "This," he said, showing Grace the forged bank documents, "is where you forged your mother's signature to gain access to her account." He then placed a medical report on the table, showing how the documents had been fabricated to make it appear as though Margaret was mentally incompetent. "And this," he said, sliding another paper across the table, "is the confession from Carol Rodriguez, your cousin, who helped you in this scheme." Grace's face turned ashen. She looked at the documents, then at me, and finally at Richard. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Richard stood up, his hands shaking with anger. "This is a setup," he shouted, but his voice wavered with uncertainty. "No, Richard," I said calmly, looking him straight in the eye. "This is the truth. This is what you and Grace did. And there's no hiding from it anymore." The police officers stepped forward, and Grace's tears finally began to fall. The shock on her face was clear, but it didn't matter anymore. She had betrayed me, and now she was going to face the consequences. "We'll be placing both of you under arrest for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy," one of the officers said. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the officers placed Grace and Richard in handcuffs, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had fought back, and now I was going to see it through. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I had won. Not just against them, but against all the years of mistreatment and manipulation. But that wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. As the police took Grace and Richard away, I knew that my life was about to change forever. I had regained my dignity, my strength, and my freedom. And nothing, not even the people I had loved most in this world, could take that away from me. The next few months were a blur. There was the lawsuit, the legal battles, the emotional toll of watching my daughter and her husband crumble under the weight of their own actions. But through it all, I remained steady. I had my lawyer, I had my resolve, and most importantly, I had myself. No one could take that from me again. A few weeks later, I received a letter from Grace. I didn't know whether I should open it. But when I finally did, I found a letter of apology. She was in therapy, she said. She was sorry for everything. She finally understood the magnitude of what she had done. I read the letter with tears in my eyes, But I wasn't sure I could ever forgive her. The wound was too deep. The betrayal was too much. And though I accepted her apology, I knew my relationship with Grace would never be the same. But what mattered most was that I was free. Free from the manipulation, free from the fear. I had rebuilt my life, piece by piece, and I was stronger than ever. I had learned that true love does not destroy. It does not steal or manipulate. And that was the lesson I would carry with me for the rest of my days.